32 H&R Magnum versus 327 Federal Magnum. So I'm going to do some hand loads today to see how 32 H&R compares to 327 Federal Magnum. So I have some interesting bullets that were sent over to the channel by one of my Patreon supporters, Hillbilly Scholar. So thank you for sending those. And what they are is Hornady 85 grain hollow points, but they are a semi-jacketed hollow point. So what's interesting about those is when you do like 85 grain XTP loads, when you do those loads by the book, what'll happen is when you seat them, the case mouth will go right to the middle of the cannelure. So with these particular bullets, they're exactly the same distance from the middle of the cannelure down to the bullet base. So you can essentially seat those as if they were 85 grain XTP. So I essentially did these by the book, but I substituted these for the 85 grain XTP. So what we got going on with our 32 H&R Magnum is I loaded those with tight group powder because I got a lot of that around, so thought I'd start using up some of that. So what I got is the 85 grain semi-jacketed hollow point over top of 3.7 grains of tight group, and I am using a Winchester small pistol primer because that's what it calls for. So 3.7 grains is the max charge listed in the book I was looking at, so we did the max charge with that. Now with our 327 Federal Magnum, that does call for a Magnum primer, so I'm using Winchester small pistol Magnum primers for the 327 Federal. And the load data shows that as 5.8 grains of tight group as the max. And I went for that, but my last charge that I measured and weighed, it was actually 5.9 grains. But I'm not concerned at all because, you know, at 5.8 grains, it shows something like 37,000 and some odd PSI. You know, the max chamber pressure for 327 Federal is 45,000. So we will be well below that. So I'm going to see what I get with those, with my 4.2 inch Ruger SP101 and my 1.875 inch Ruger LCR, and we'll see if there's a big difference in two different barrel lengths between 32 H&R Magnum and 327 Federal Magnum. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my ballistic gel test. So I'm going to do my real world simulation with every one of these shots, and what that is 4 layers of denim on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back that's going to represent hitting back ribs. So clear ballistics is roughly a half representation of the density of flesh. So when you're talking 3 inches and 16 inches, it's more like 1.5 inches and 8 inches in actual flesh. So what we got going on here is the simulation of about a 9.5 inch thick individual with ribs in there. So we'll see what we get between both of those calibers and both of those barrel lengths, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 32 H&R Magnum over top of 3.7 grains of tight group. So I'm going to test it through the 4.2 inch barrel, and then we'll test it through the 1.875 inch and see how much velocity we lose going to a shorter barrel. So 32 H&R Magnum, 4.2 inch Ruger SP101, about 5 yards from that target. $1,095. 1,086, 1,087, 1,092, 1,086, 1,077. So that's some pretty nice consistent velocity overall, and some pretty high velocity actually out of just a 32 H&R Magnum. So same load in the 1.875 inch barrel. Let's see how this compares to that upper 1000s. I lose an over 2 inches of barrel length. $1,020, 1,022, 1010, 998, 994, 991. So also not too bad of velocity overall, consistency, and pretty good velocity. And case ejection with stuff like this is pretty easy. So we'll see what we get here with our 327 Federal Magnum and the 4.2 inch and the 1.875 inch. So loading these things up. So these are an 85 grain semi-jacketed hollow point. 5.9 grains of type group, so a pretty good jump there. So let's see what we get with our 327 Federal version here. $14.13, $14.21, $14.37, $14.33, $14.48, $14.38. All right, so again, the consistency of that is really, really good. So I'm really surprised. So 1.875 inch. Another thing that surprised me, I was thinking I was going to feel some real heavy Magnum recoil, and it's just like came out feeling like a 22. It felt almost the same as that 32 H&R, which is weird. So 327 in the snub. $12.95. Sorry. $12.70. $12.81. $12.81. $12.68. All right, so that also is pretty consistent. I mean, it's not super consistent, but a lot of times factory ammo, I see over 100 feet per second differences in a big spread of velocity, and this is a lot tighter velocity spread. Case ejection is not too bad. A little snub there. And my SP101, you know, it's actually a little bit sticky in this, which is interesting, because this gun typically doesn't have as big of a problem with sticky cases. They do come out, but I mean, it's just a little bit sticky. So let's hit our Ballistics gel block. We'll do the 32 H&R Magnum first through both barrel lengths. Then we'll move on to the 327 through both barrel lengths and see how these compare. All right, we'll do our real world simulation. 4 layers of denim followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics. It represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard. Normally I like to do a plain clear ballistics shot, give the ammo the best chance to expand. And the reason why I do that is because I'm very aware that there are other YouTube testers out there. So if I'm doing something that's super different than most people all the time, they're always kind of asking, hey, your results are a lot different. Why is that? And that's because I'm using like rib simulation most of the time. But with stuff like this, it's unlikely you're going to find ammo like this. So I'm just going to do a real world simulation with all of these shots. So 32 H&R Magnum through the 2 different barrel lengths. Let's see what we get through our 4.2 inch barrel. The recoil on that is laughably low. And the bullet did fall out the side there. So I'm going to do one more, center it a little bit more. All right. Let's hit it going through our snub nose barrel. Let's go take a look. All right, so I am kind of surprised here. You know, the first one fell off the side, and I could see it back there, and it honestly doesn't look expanded to me. And looking at, the one going through the snub nose, I definitely can see that's not expanded at all. So I can't really tell with this 4.2 inch barrel shot whether we got expansion or if I'm just looking at it kind of weird. But yeah, looking here at our first shot, it does look like expansion. It does look like expansion here with our second shot with the 4.2 inch barrel. With the snub nose, it looks like it could potentially be starting to tumble. So not the best performance I've ever seen with the round. I was hoping for a little bit better because, we're almost hitting 1,100 feet per second, which is a really good velocity. And first 3 inches, the energy dump is okay. It's weird, that first shot, there isn't much with the 4.2 inch. Second shot, there's more, and then there's an okay amount right there with our snub nose, but it doesn't look like it expanded at all, which it should have at that velocity. So what we got going on here with our 4.2 inch barrel with that 32 H&R Magnum is a good amount of tearing going on in there. We went to 13 3/4 inches of penetration. Parallax will make it look like this bullet is up probably an inch more, but 13 3/4 is where it is from a straight on view. And then our second shot, it stopped right at our rib simulation, and I don't think it did much to it. It nicked it pretty good. So that would probably indicate it would come close to passing through an average attacker, but not quite. So being that it stopped right at our back rib simulation, it stopped at 19 inches of penetration. So it looks to me like through the 4.2 inch, there's a big difference here that you know, upper thousands is enough velocity to not over penetrate, but when we go down to, you know, lower thousands, about 1,000 feet per second, that's just not quite enough there to get the performance we're looking for. So let's try our 327 Federal Magnum and see how those compare to these 32 H&R Magnums. All right, 327 Federal Magnum, and you know, at least in this 4-inch barrel, we're upping that velocity by like 250 feet per second. So that's a lot more velocity. So let's see if we get with our 327 Federal Magnum through our 4.2 inch barrel. Wow. Let me set that back up and hit it with the snub nose barrel. I say wow because, you know, I'm not expecting to see that first 3-inch piece jump up. That's normally what I see with Magnums. And the fact that the recoil out of this particular revolver is significantly less than a 9mm, it just doesn't add up mentally. That it feels like I just fired a 22 and then I see that whole thing jump. That's really incredible. But let's hit it with the 327 Federal through the snub nose, see how this does. Let's go take a look. All right, so big improvement there. And what's interesting is with these particular loads, like I'm saying, with this bullet weight and these particular powder charges, with that particular powder, which is a very fast burning powder, that's why I wanted to use it, because I thought it'd make a good snub nose load. Our recoil is very low, yet it performs significantly better than the 32 H&R Magnum. So this is kind of, you look back at this, you look at the creation of 32 caliber, this makes sense why people were probably using this bullet, testing 32 H&R Magnum and thinking, we could probably do better if we had something more velocity going on. So when we look at our impact here with the 4.2 inch barrel, we can see that it looks like it's starting to kind of fragment a little bit because that hole isn't particularly straight through perfectly, but yet it went in a straight line. So that would indicate fragmentation. Our 1.75 inch barrel, it looks like it expanded better without fragmenting. The energy dump is really good. And what's interesting about this is it's in, you know, this half of that first 3 inches, which I don't typically see, which means it only went in about an inch and just burst open. And then it's going to cause a lot of damage going in there. We busted off some pieces with our 327 Federal with the 4.2 inch barrel. So that might be almost a little bit too much velocity, but it almost looks like perfect velocity for the snub there. So 5.9 inches of tight group Winchester small pistol primer. If you can acquire these 85 grain semi-jacket hollow points, really fantastic. But what we got going on with penetration through our 4.2 inch barrel was we're right at 16 inches of penetration. So that's really good penetration overall. Then we look at through our snub nose, we're about 14.5 inches, so an 1.5 inches less than through the 4.2 inch barrel. But very surprised here with this performance. I was thinking, you know, if we were going to get around 1,100 feet per second, that's plenty of velocity, you know, to get hollow point expansion. But yet with the 32 H&R Mag around that velocity, it's not quite enough to get good expansion. But with our 327 Federal, you know, we don't even really, with this powder and this bullet weight, we're not jumping that that recoil up much at all. It's very, very interesting. So let's pull these out of the block, take a close-up look at them. Now show our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. These are the ones from our 32 H&R Magnum. So our 32 H&R Mag from our 4.2 inch barrel and from our 1.75 inch barrel. So the one through our 4.2 inch barrel. Interesting expansion, expanded kind of on one side but not the other. But still, I would consider that pretty good expansion. And the one through our 1.875 inch barrel, just very mediocre nose flattening. So there's a big difference here with the same load with the 4.2 inch versus our 1.875 inch. So 32 Magnum isn't quite enough when we're talking a snub nose barrel. Just not quite enough velocity there to get very good expansion. Now when we look at our 327 Federal Magnum, much better performance overall, much better expansion. Our 4.2 inch barrel expanded so much that it peeled back like a ball, so it's actually a smaller bullet overall, it looks like it, than our 1.75 inch, which looks like bigger expansion. So our snub nose barrel there, and then our 4.2 inch barrel there. So there was just so much more power with this that it peeled that bullet back. So that doesn't necessarily mean that this performed better, because at one point this one was as big as this one, probably even bigger, and then it peeled back as it entered a little bit deeper. But the end result is a bullet that is a little bit smaller there. So I would say overall the consistency of the 327 is definitely a lot better than the 32 H&R Magnum. And that's one thing, the biggest thing I've noticed over the years of testing 327 Federal is that the velocity is always so high that they're always very, very consistent results. Like even low end 327s through snub is like well over 1200 feet per second. So you always have really, really good performance out of 327. Definitely a huge improvement for our snub. You know, you could argue that, you know, the velocity we were working with the 32 H&R Mag versus the 327 out of the 4-inch barrel, you know, it didn't make a huge difference. I mean, I think it did, but you could argue it didn't. You can't argue with this, that, you know, we were low 1000s feet per second with this, and we did not get very good performance. But this was actually a higher velocity out of the snub than what this was out of the 4.2 inch. So therefore we have even greater performance. So I would say 327 is overall 327 Federal is our better cartridge here. So that's a close-up look at those. All right, 14 yards from the target. So what I want to do with this is within the same revolver, switch up the ammo rather than go from the 4.2 to the snub nose with the same ammo. I want to switch up from 32 H&R Magnum to the 327 Federal Magnum in each revolver and see if I can feel a huge difference there. So we'll start with our 4.2 inch barrel. 32 H&R Magnum, I'm just going to fire them off as fast as I think I can hit the target and just kind of try to feel what kind of practical recoil and shootability I feel with these. 32 H&R Mag. That's basically like shooting a 22, to be completely honest. So I'm going to try to keep that memory of what I just felt fresh in my mind here, and put in some 327 Federal. See how these things feel. You know, I did pull one, and that's just from me shooting. It's not having anything to do with the recoil in this particular case. And with that, this actually feels about like shooting a 38 Special. So we go from feeling like a 22 to feeling like a 38 Special. So I guess that is a huge increase, but it's not a lot of recoil to end up with, because 38 Special has less recoil than 9mm. So yeah, that was very pleasant to shoot. Now we'll see what happens when we do that same thing in the little snub nose barrel here. 32 H&R Magnum. .327 Federal. Alright, so there's definitely a bigger difference with the snub nose versus the 4.2 inch. So in the snub nose, the 32 H&R Magnum, I would say, feels like a 38 Special. And the 327 Federal Magnum in this feels maybe like a 38 Special plus P or plus P plus. Maybe like a 9mm out of a snub nose revolver. So definitely still not a lot of recoil at all. Very pleasant to shoot. There was absolutely zero pain in shooting this. It's definitely not like shooting a 357 Magnum. And granted, it is a very low end load, so it shouldn't feel that way. But overall, there's not a huge difference there going up to the 327 Federal, but yet we're adding hundreds of feet per second. So let me back it up and see how these shoot from some more distance. All right, 75 yards from the target just for fun. A lot of people don't like to see this because, why that far? Sometimes it shows a little bit of a difference in, the accuracy from one round to the other, because if one's super, super, super accurate, a lot of times they'll keep hitting at this distance, but if they're not super accurate, sometimes I miss more times. So same thing I did before, 32 H&R Magnum, then I'm going to switch up to the 327 Federal Magnum in the same revolver and see how these do. So let's start with our 32 H&R Magnum, see how these things shoot from 75 yards. All right, add a little hard primer. All right. Yeah, one didn't fire. And with some of these ones I'm using back here, I actually did use some Magnum primers. And for whatever reason, they're just not setting off in this. But all the things I did in front of the chronograph and in the ballistic shell and at 14 yards were all with standard primers. But I had to find some Magnum primers to finish up a batch. And I saved that to use back here because I figured it would matter less. But when I started making those hits, I aimed at the head on that silhouette because I was thinking maybe they were dropping low. So let's see how our 327 Federal does on this revolver. That sounded weird. Had a weird sound to it. Keep going. Huh, I don't know where these are going. Oh. The Magnum primers are giving me an issue again. I think part of it could also be, I changed the spring in this. So to a little bit reduced power spring. And there's hardly any impact on that primer. I'll try single action. All right, so I wasn't particularly good with any of those. So I think probably what's going on is because they're such a light bullet and they're moving so fast, sometimes what happens is, and I'm not even really realizing it, they're actually hitting low because I'm so used to slow rounds and I have my sights kind of adjusted for a little bit slower rounds. And you could be dead on with that. But it's also accounting for the fact you get a little bit of muzzle rise. And just the way I pull that trigger, it can sometimes raise that muzzle. So it's right for me with most rounds, but then when you get one that's exceptionally fast that leaves the muzzle before my hands even do much wrong to that revolver, it'll shoot in a perfectly straight line, and it'll seem like it's low even though it's not low, if that makes any sense. Snub nose revolver, LCR. Let's see what I can do with our 32 H&R Magnums. So with that, I think, it's just trying to figure out where the point of impact is. And I think it was shooting a little bit high, a little bit to the right, so I aimed a little bit left and a little bit low. Now with these, my guess is I'll probably get just enough muzzle rise here that if I aim center with these, they should hit point of impact. That's my guess. So 327 Federal in the snub. A little bit to the right again. All right, so that one shot really, really wrong. It hit below the target by like 30, 40 feet. I don't know what would account for something like that to happen. It could just have to do with the bullet being semi-jacketed and it's getting squashed a little bit when I was, seating them. That could have something to do with that. I don't have the proper, nose seating for these type of bullets. I'll keep going here. Wow. That one shot above the target by like 25 feet. Keep going. The last one I thought I was out, so I just popped one off thinking it was going to go click, and it didn't. So the long range accuracy, I found something out here, is pretty terrible with these. And I think a lot of it, like I was saying, when I loaded these, typical seating stems are not made for these type of bullets. So what happens is that slightly flat rounded thing just kind of crushes that lead. And it doesn't make enough of a difference to matter at close range where you're going to use a handgun. But when you're talking some distances like this, I guarantee if these were XTPs, I would have none of these issues, and would have pretty good accuracy. But with these, they were just shooting all over the place, so I had a terrible time, placing them on target from this distance. So very interesting overall, though. Looking at these, they were a pretty good bullet for self-defense, and more so than just looking at the bullet design. Looking at 32 H&R Magnum in general versus 327 Federal Magnum. It makes sense to me why 327 Federal became a thing back in 2007. It's like 32 H&R Magnum is pretty good, but why can't you just push it up higher and faster? And it didn't even take that much power, and it takes very little extra recoil to get it up to over 1,400 feet per second. And, this is actually a very low-end 327 Federal Magnum. So to me, it makes a whole ton of sense why this was a thing. But the problem with 327 is if you can't even convince these 9mm fanboys who are also polymer pistol fanboys to get on board with 30 Super Carry, good luck with a revolver cartridge saying, hey, this is something that's great, because they're not going to be listening. And that's really the downfall of 327 Federal Magnum, is it's a little bit too little too late, to come up with a fantastic cartridge in the 21st century. But it's still a fantastic cartridge to those who are listening. So very good cartridge compared to the 32 H&R Magnum. But the 32 H&R Magnum's fine too. So this is a very interesting test to me. For me, I wasn't thinking I was going to get as much of a velocity increase as what I got, just simply by going from 32 H&R to 327 Federal, simply because these are hand loads, and hand loads are always a little bit weak with these type of powders, like tight group powder. So I thought maybe I'd get 100 feet per second more, not like 250 feet per second more. So I'm really, really impressed with that. So again, thank you to Hillbilly Scholar for sending these old school bullets. I think most people wouldn't have an opportunity to test something like this, and I got to. So thanks again. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.